The position of the chairman of the National Electoral Commission has become very important in Nigeria because it does appear that politicians of all shades of opinion believe that the INEC plays a major part, if not the most important part, in winning an election. Many people, in discussing how President Goodluck Jonathan lost the 2015 elections, insist that if only he had removed Professor Attahiru Jega, he may have won the election. Is the INEC chairmanship position so important that if you do not win it, you will lose elections? This is the other side. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. A few days ago, very controversial engineer Buba Galadima, now a chieftain of the new Nigeria People's Party, warned that a civil unrest will ensue in Nigeria if the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu goes ahead with its alleged plans to appoint a retired Court of Appeal judge as the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Buba Galadima, in his interview with the Arise Television, said that the retired judge, according to rumors, will be nominated to become the new chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. He said, and I quote, "I wish it is not true. Because if that man becomes the chairman of INEC, be rest assured that this government is inviting a civil war in this country," unquote.
The wisdom by the APC to start campaign early is because they wanted to see their opponents such that they will, through time, before time, cut them into pieces. And I saw some of my friends in the opposition just fall into the trap because they are not seasoned politicians. They are opportunists in politics. If they had known, or if they are politicians, they couldn't have danced to the drum being beaten by the APC. Now you can see some of them started with, I was here on this platform to warn them that no opposition politician in his right senses will start a marathon race against a sitting government. Because by the time it is time for you to say go, you are already tired and exhausted. And this is exactly the trap they fell into. So they were decimated in the SDP. They moved to the ADC. They are still shouting, 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 shouting. It's not yet time. And they will get exhausted. They will be dismembered. Especially come November, there is rumors all over the place that this government is nominating a just retired Court of Appeal judge who is known for notoriety to be the chairman of INEC. I wish it is not true, because if that man becomes the chairman of INEC, be rest assured that this government is inviting a civil war in this country.
The implication, of course, of what he has said is simply that, one, the judge may likely be a Yoruba man from the southwest. This will not be very surprising because it does appear that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is intent on appointing Yoruba people to positions of authority in government that, in his opinion, they may not have been fairly treated by previous governments. And in any case, like I said in one of my last videos, it is obvious that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is interested, like most leaders in Africa, in bringing people who will be loyal to him and will not take decisions that will be detrimental to what his interest might be. But this is also begging the question, because the National Electoral Commission is supposed to be an independent body. However, some people argue, and of course, a friend of mine sent me a text message in which he said that, as far as he's concerned, there is nothing wrong in appointing a Yoruba man as the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. In his opinion, no Yoruba man has ever been made the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Let's take a look at the list of the people who have headed this very important body that determines who wins and who does not win elections in Nigeria. As far as Nigerians are concerned, elections is in many phases. The first phase is for you to win your party's nomination. Another phase will be for you to go around doing your campaign. Another phase two will be for you on election day, come out and vote and ensure that you get plurality of votes. That is majority of votes in the locality where you're contesting the election. And then you need to also have the National Electoral Commission as your partner in the election, because the INEC officials, people who superintend over the elections could determine whether you win the elections or not. In the 1999 elections, I was a reporter for the British Broadcasting Corporation in Jos, Plateau State, and we went out to monitor elections. When we left the polling units, the number of votes had been counted in several of the polling units. A friend of mine, then we were both young, told me that we're just wasting our time, that by morning we will see that the election result had changed and that the person who will lead in those polling units that we had visited will not be Chief Samuel Olufalaye, but will be the then former head of state, General Olusegun Obasanjo. And true to his words, in the morning when we went to the collection centers, we discovered that the votes that President Olusegun Obasanjo had gotten were several times much more than the votes that we saw going for Chief Olufalaye. What happened? According to my friend who is now late, the number of people registered to vote is always much, much higher than the number of people who turn out to vote. And what politicians used to do at that time, in collusion with the political parties, was that at the close of the elections, after the votes had been counted, in collusion with the various communities, they will sit down and take a percentage of the ballot papers that were not used and share them sometimes equally to all the party agents that were present. And the party agent present will then start a market. Whichever agent came to that polling unit with a lot of money will buy up the ballot papers from the agent that wanted to sell his votes, because all parties, whether they had candidates or not, in those days, every party has its name on the ballot paper, will share the ballot papers that were left. And the person who had money at that time will simply buy up the ballot papers that were unused. And so at the end of the day, what used to happen was that after the public had voted, then you have ghost voters through party agents. INEC officials do their voting. And in many cases, those votes used to be higher than the votes of the actual living voters who had left the voting polling units and had gone back to their homes, celebrating in their minds that they had made sure that the person they wanted in that community had won elections. And so the INEC has remained very important. And then the process of rigging the election changed a few years later. We had the situation where the parties were no longer satisfied with buying up unused ballot papers at polling units. They simply arranged to snatch ballot boxes from INEC officials who may be going to perform their duties and thumbprint the ballot papers and bring them in, and they will be used. That phase passed. We go to a phase where people who rigged the election did was simply to wait for all the voting to take place, collect or seize the result sheets, and write whatever results that they wanted to do. So the election entered another phase in Nigeria where what people simply did was to seize result sheets. And sometimes what INEC officials and the parties used to do would be to take fake result sheets to the polling units, where party agents who are not diligent enough will not notice that there were no result sheets. And after whatever elections you did, they simply, on their way back to the collection center, they will sit down and write whatever result that they wanted to write. And so what had been happening is that at all points, Nigerian politicians, in collusion with security agencies or security agents and INEC officials, will determine who will win the election results. This is one of the reasons why you see close to election, all political parties will be working with INEC or some INEC officials to determine who will be their INEC officials working in their locations. Sometimes political parties or individuals who are strong will make efforts and determine who will be the returning officers who will be presiding over the elections processes. This shows how important the INEC has been. And the result of it is that it has become important for people to be thinking about who is going to be in charge of the INEC, since INEC has become part of the election process. So important in some respects that people say that you could do whatever campaign you want to do. If the INEC doesn't want you to win the elections, you will not win the elections. Now let's take a look at the people that have headed this body, the election body in Nigeria in the last 20 years or more. On your screen, you'll see that between 1964 and 1966, we had Ayo Eswa as the chairman of the election body. 1976 to 1979, there was one Michael Ani. 1980 to 1983, we have Justice Victor Whiskey. And I do remember I was a student then when he was accused of corruption. He said he had never seen the type of money that they were accusing him of having. Between 1987 and 1989, we have Professor Emeritus Ewa. 1989 to 1993, we had Professor Humphrey Nwosu, the man who conducted the 1993 elections. And then 1993, we have Professor Okon Oya. 1994 to 1998, we have Soma Dagogo Jack. 1998 to 2000, we had Justice Ephraim Akpata. 2000 to 2005, we had Dr. Abel Gobadia. 2005 to 2010, Professor Maurice Iwu. And then 2010 to 2015, Professor Attahiru Jega. And the current man, for a graduate of the University of Jos, so Mahmood has been there since 2015. Mahmood Yakubu since 2015. I was a point that one lady, Amina Zakari, acted as the chairman of INEC. And of course, it's not every time that it was called INEC. Initially, this same body was called Federal Electoral Commission. It was called FEDECO. It was called NECON, and now INEC. Those who say that there has never been a Yoruba man as chairman of the INEC since 1960 are very correct. On the list, there has not been a Yoruba man. But if you look at the list too, there has not been any time, apart from the time that President Muhammadu Buhari won election 2015, and then 2015 and 2019, that you've had somebody heading INEC who comes from the same area as the person who is leading the country. That is to say that if you look at the list from 1966 to 2010, majority of the people, or almost all the people from what you call the southeast, the Igbo areas of Nigeria, and the south of Nigeria, in those periods, there was no person who was heading Nigeria, who was president of Nigeria from those two parts of the country. As a matter of fact, the person who conducted the elections that brought in Umaru Musa Yar'Adua and President Goodluck Jonathan, you can see that there has not been any time, apart from President Muhammadu Buhari, that a sitting president appointed somebody from his own part of the world to become the chairman of the Electoral Commission. And in any case, even for President Muhammadu Buhari, the person he appointed, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, is from Bauchi State, that is the northeast, and not from the northwest where the late President Muhammadu Buhari hailed from. While it is true that no Yoruba man has been the chairman of INEC since the beginning, a Yoruba man got elected in 1998 when someone, that is Justice Ephraim Akpata from Edo State, I think, was the chairman of the Electoral Commission. And so for his election, President Tinubu will not need to appoint somebody from the Southwest for him to win the election. What is your view about the debate about the importance of INEC? Do you think that if INEC were truly independent, doing things properly in accordance with the law, people will be thinking, people will be worried about who becomes the chairman of INEC or who becomes the resident electoral commissioners or the federal commissioners of INEC, or even presiding officers and other officials of INEC during the election? This is the other side. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. Please click the link in the description and join our channel as a member.